Donington cade.
At Donington, he fell. I ran to the emergency room and he came to me with his bleeding hand and his little finger dangling out, and he said, "Doctor, cut off my finger. I want to race." I was amazed. The finger was amputated, and just 1 week later he came back to show me the amputated finger and said, "Hey, doctor, am I okay to race?" And I answered, "If you like it like this." He just looked and laughed and said, "Doctor, like this I'm going to ride even faster." And he proved it. He was right.
Yes, it's certainly fair enough to say that a life can be summed up in one sentence. Perfect example of this is Troy Bayliss. "Doctor, cut my finger. I want to race." This sentence encapsulates everything there is to say about Troy. His passion for motorcycles, his desire to race, and the knowledge that he was condemned to win. Typical of every champion. In 2006, Troy returned to World Superbike, and he did it on his first love, a bike that gave him his first world title, a Ducati. In Borgo Panigale, there were a lot of people who still believed in him, like Paolo Ciabatti.
We decided that we still believed a lot in the rider, and that it was important to bring him back to Superbike. We managed to convince all those who weren't sure that after 2 years of not exactly brilliant seasons in MotoGP, that Troy was still the rider he used to be. Certainly the X-ray that he sent us, where you could see all the screws in his forearm and around the wrist, was a bit worrying, but Troy came back and he won.
I come back with Ducati, and it was a little bit of a breath of fresh air when I first tested the bike in Valencia, the 999 this was. As soon as I hopped on the bike, so I'd had something, even though my time in GP didn't go to plan. It made me a stronger person and I think a better rider in the end. By the time I come back to Ducati in Superbike, I had some belief in what I could do, but I mean, after I tested the bike for the first time, it felt like I'd never been off a Ducati Superbike.
He was now a better rider and a better person. Troy made the most of his experience in the MotoGP circus. The World Championship had been his boyhood dream. He had made his dream come true. And even if it didn't go the way he had expected, it had been a great experience. In the Superbike box once again, he teamed up with Ernesto Marinelli, who in addition to being his track engineer, was also Ducati's technical director in Superbike.
With him I really experienced so many things that it was impossible not to love him, and you knew that he would sort out any problems because he always gave 100%. On a technical level, I believe that one of his greatest skills is that he based everything on the lap time. So when he went out onto the track, he always gave 100%. And for any changes that he tried, whether he liked them or he didn't like them, when it came to the lap time, we hardly ever made the wrong choices. Something that, instead for other riders, was a bit more difficult because as they didn't really have any preference, they made you do what they wanted. It was great to work with Troy because right from the first day he said that it didn't bother him if changes worked well or they didn't. And on the other hand, he used to say, "Doesn't feel any better," and he saw that we scrapped it. As for his riding style, he was very unusual, in the sense that unlike most riders with a clean and stable riding style, he moved around a lot on the bike. And this gave him the advantage of being able to compensate with his position for any problems that the motorcycle had. He was someone who always had a very extreme setup, which few riders were able to use. But as he had this strange characteristic of moving around a lot on the bike, we were able to capitalise on certain solutions and compensate for the defects.
Troy and Marinelli had known each other since the days of the AMA Superbike Championship in America.
The first time we went testing at Daytona, which is a very unusual track, the old circuit I mean, the one that was used for the 200-mile race with the 4 NASCAR corners. Well, there was the NASCAR Turn 4 anyway, the last one before the straight, where in the previous years the riders were at full throttle, let's say on the extra qualifying lap. Then, usually, they always rolled off the gas a bit. On his second exit, Troy with race tyres was on full throttle, on a track that he'd never even seen before. So this is just to help you understand the amount of skill he had in riding the bike. Call it what you want.
The season was off to a great start. Confidence with the 2006 Ducati 999 was at its highest, and after running in with 2 second places in Losail and a 6th in the first race at Phillip Island, Troy notched up a string of 8 successive victories.
Silverstone. This is just to let you know what sort of rider Troy really was. After free practice, we went out in qualifying. He did a lap with a used race tyre. It was a good lap considering it was a used tyre, but nothing in particular, and then he crashed the bike. He ran back to the garage, he took the other bike with a new tyre, went out again, did his flying lap, and then chucked that one into the gravel as well. Then he ran back to the box. We had no more bikes there until they brought them back. We got the first bike back and it was wrecked, so the mechanics went to work to take the bike apart and then put it back together again. In the meantime, they brought back the second bike, which was in a bit better condition, so we just left the first one in bits and started to sort out the second one. I think we had just over 3 minutes to go before the end of the session, and we were at the bottom of the timesheets. After we'd virtually done only just one lap with the used tyre, we put on a new tyre at the end of qualifying, he went out and set pole position in just one lap.
With 4 more victories to his name, for a magical total of 12, he beat off all the competition, headed by the former Ducati champion and now Honda rider James Toseland, who was his greatest opponent in those 2 years, as Colin Edwards had been in 2001 and 2002. A successful Bayliss was crowned world champion for the second time, and there was no reason to think that in 2007 the winning streak would be interrupted. But once again, that was not the case.
2007 was a very difficult year, because the 999 was growing a little bit old, and the other bikes had sort of gained a bit more speed. So we knew we had to be really on the ball, but anyway, that all come to an end for me, I guess you could say, in Donington when I had the accident there.
Troy's season, which was a bit up and down, can be summed up with 7 wins and a 4th place finish, which was his worst result in the championship if we exclude the year of his debut, and it certainly did not represent him as a champion. On the other hand, on April the 1st, Troy again wrote his name in a chapter of World Superbike history and as a racing legend. In fact, in the European Grand Prix at Donington, the 3rd round of the championship, he crashed in race 1 and was hurt. But it is what he told Massimo Corbascio, the director of the Clinica Mobile in Superbike, that made history.
Eravamo in Clinica Mobile a Donington Park.
We were in the Clinica Mobile in Donington Park. We always used to watch the race or practice on the TV monitors inside the Clinica. At a certain point, we see that Troy Bayliss unexpectedly slides off before braking for a bend and he crashes. He gets up. Everything seemed okay. Didn't look as if he'd been hurt or even that it was a very big accident. A crash like many others, you could say. Every so often we were used to seeing Bayliss or other riders crashing at some point. That's racing. And already from the television we could see if it was a serious crash or not and decide whether or not we needed to go to the emergency room to follow the rider or to intervene. I was on the ladder of the Clinica Mobile to see what had happened after the crash when I saw Troy arrive and his hand was all bloody. Doctor, he says, cut off my finger, I need to race. I had a look and his little finger was literally dangling off, just a bit of skin holding it in place. Really, the most important thing he told me later was that he wanted to attach his finger back on so he could race. Come on, it's the usual adrenaline rush that kicks in with riders when they have a crash. So I took him and his finger to my friends in the Donington emergency room before taking him to the Clinica.
In the emergency room, they patched up the little finger of his left hand the best they could, but above all, the massive blow to the groin area that Troy had suffered when he slammed into the fuel tank in the crash.
Yes, his groin. But all the journalists wanted to interview me about this doctor cut my finger, I want to race thing. In my life as a doctor for Superbike or MotoGP riders, it was not the first time that I found myself with a rider who wakes up from a coma in the ambulance and says to me, when can I start racing again? Or another rider waking up in hospital saying, doctor, when can I get back on the bike? In my life I've known a lot of riders, English, Americans, Australians. Maybe it's because I like Australia, but it's clear that they have a totally different character from other riders. For me, they are the nicest riders and very friendly with everyone. They don't lord it over you. They get up to all sorts of mischief, but they're always your friends for the rest of your life.
Troy was always a winner, even when he lost. If he didn't win, he won over people's hearts. 2 weeks after the accident, on April the 15th, he lined up on the track once again at Valencia, where he finished 3rd. In that race, Lorenzo Lanzi, his teammate in the Ducati factory team for the 2nd consecutive year, came 6th.
So the best thing about Troy was that he was so unpretentious, and the reason for that was because he came from nothing. He did things his own way, as I said, with a massive true passion for everything. He was sincere, and he always remembered where he'd come from. He always had a kind word for the people who were around him, whether they were his rivals, his friends, relatives, even though obviously he had his days when things weren't going well. I saw him winning races in what were absolutely the worst conditions. At that time, maybe it was the track conditions or whatever, but I can tell you that he was the most complete of riders around at the time. He was absolutely one of the greatest riders in Superbike history, and I would even say that had he not gone to MotoGP, he would have won a lot more World Superbike Championship titles.
And while he might have missed out on the World Championship title that year, Troy had a burning desire to make up for it in 2008. However, as usual, he wrong-footed everyone, and at the beginning of the year announced what none of his fans had ever wanted to hear.
The plan was to get back to Australia before the kids got too old for school and just get them home at the right time. So even though I said I was going to stop back in 2002, I'm still going, but then I was trying to get a little bit more time. And so I promised Kim, I said, I just want one more year. I said, we'll announce it as soon as we start in 2008, we'll announce that I'm going to stop, because if I don't announce it, you just can't stop. So I've got to get it out there to everybody. So we did that, let everybody know, just so it was done.
2008 was Troy's last year of racing, but it was also a truly magical year, even if it did begin with an accident at Phillip Island a few weeks before the start of the championship, in which he broke his collarbone. But we are talking about Troy Bayliss. So in the first race of the championship in Qatar, after failing to shine in practice, he crossed the finish line first on his 1098R, ahead of a competitive Max Biaggi, also on a Ducati. This was Troy's way of getting a message across. I'm still here, and I'm still the best. His teammate was now another Italian, Michel Fabrizio, who had cheered for Troy as a boy and now admired his talent and determination.
The fact was that when he decided that it was time to set a quick time or to do one of those crazy races that only he did, he went out and did it. He switched off his brain and said, okay, now you need to do it. And he went out and did. He had this extreme ability to switch off his brain and show everyone else how it was done. Especially when we were in a bit of difficulty. He could work wonders with the bike.
At Valencia, the third round of the season, the win went to Lorenzo Lanzi, who is now riding a Ducati run by a private team. Troy came in second, and Troy being Troy, he wasn't bothered about it too much. Or so it seemed.
He wasn't very happy that he hadn't won the race, but he was the first to congratulate me, and he always showed himself to be the same person that he still is today. Every so often we're in touch with each other. We write to each other, hey man, how's it going, how you doing, that sort of thing. He wants to know what I'm up to, what I think of this, what I think of that. After the race he said, I'm happy for you, I'm happy that you won today, that you finished in front of me because you deserve it, you're a fast rider, and so on.
But it was, of course, Bayliss's numerous exploits that left a mark. And the champion left his hallmark to the very end at the last race of the championship. Like a great actor, Troy wanted to step off the stage to thunderous applause, leaving only sorrow behind him. We are at Portimao, Portugal. Let's listen to how Davide Tardozzi remembers everything.
It's true that his retirement faded a bit into the background, but he actually quit racing in the final round at Portugal, where he dominated both races by a big margin. Then he retired as a world champion after dominating the final two races of the season. I think it was an amazing thing that he did that.
And here is Michel Fabrizio, who in race 2 finished behind his teammate.
The best moment was when he won the World Championship and I was also with him, so that was an even better memory for me. Also because at the last race he was first and I was second, and we finished almost one behind the other. It was great to celebrate the world title in this race because I felt it was a little bit mine as well.
The team was great and strong, and I rode well, and it was just a pretty good year. It was just something that I just wanted to finish off like that, and then come the last race to win to do the win races on the day was incredible for me, and it was just so hard. The cool down lap in that race was the hardest lap of my life. Just knowing that was it for me. It took me years to get over it.
So that afternoon the curtain came down on the remarkable story of Troy Bayliss, the spray painter, or Baylistic as they also called him. One of the few riders who was able to give so much joy, as Tardozzi admits.
Yes, a lot of joy, absolutely. I've been really lucky to spend so many years with Troy and to experience the most amazing moments with him.
At the age of 39, after 52 victories and 3 Superbike world titles, and the only Ducati rider to win with 3 different models of motorbike, Troy said goodbye to his Superbike rivals and teammates. But he wasn't going to be able to stay away from bikes forever. He had petrol in his veins, and the adrenaline rush that racing gave him was lifeblood for him. He kept on racing and having fun. He would never stop. In 2015, he replaced the injured Davide Giuliano on the factory Ducati, 2 rounds and 4 races in Australia and Thailand. These were truly his last in World Superbike. Today you think of Troy Bayliss and you see his smile. You see him on the bike in the cooling off lap after the finish line. His helmet off, his eyes sparkling with joy. You see the passion of this unique rider in the world, who won so much and who made our lives even more thrilling with his amazing exploits, leaving an unforgettable memory in all those who knew him, like Ernesto Marinelli.
Just to give you another example of what Troy was like, after he retired in 2008, about a year and a half later, sometime in 2010, he came back to do a test at Mugello. That was the time in which he was thinking of whether or not to return to racing. Anyway, he arrived at the track in Mugello where it was absolutely pouring down with rain. So I sent him a text message in the morning saying, look, hey, it's wet, take it easy, it's probably going to rain all day. The track was scheduled to open at 9, but he was at the track at 7:30. At 8 AM he was already in his leathers, and at 8:15 he was asking me when the pit lane was going to open. All this was more than a year since he'd last raced a bike. He eventually went out on track and that day beat our record Superbike time at Mugello in the wet. He was awesome. The next day he literally destroyed the track record with slicks in the dry. It gives you just an idea of who Troy was. Someone who after a year and a half without racing could get back on a bike at a track where he hadn't tested at for ages, with a different bike and so on, and just went out on track and did what he did. Let's just say that when he was fully focused and convinced about what he was doing, Troy was virtually unbeatable.
Text by Luca De Lecari, narrated by Julian Thomas and Michael Hill, with the voices of Troy Bayliss, Massimo Corbascio, Paolo Ciabatti, Michel Fabrizio, Lorenzo Lanzi, Ernesto Marinelli and Davide Tardozzi. For the quotes, courtesy, a man, a rider, a legend. Sport Review Production.